And so that the emotional journey you go off on, one is one of that takes into account the great historical cost, the great human cost.
Few war movies have ever felt as real, raw, and gut-wrenching as Saving Private Ryan. Released in 1998, Steven Spielberg's masterpiece didn't just show war, but made you feel every inch of it. But what most fans never realized is just how far the cast and crew went to bring that authenticity to life. Before filming, Spielberg sent the main actors, including Tom Hanks, Edward Burns, and Vin Diesel, through a brutal 10 days boot camp run by real military trainers. They slept in mud, carried heavy gear, and faced sleepless nights to truly understand a soldier's pain. What's even more shocking is that Spielberg kept Matt Damon out of that training on purpose. He wanted the other actors to resent him, just like their characters did when risking their lives to save Private Ryan. What about the fact that many of the battlefield scenes weren't scripted word for word? The explosions, confusion, and screams were filmed live to capture genuine fear. And that haunting D-Day landing sequence, it cost over $12 million and left even veterans trembling. Behind the cameras, real emotion, exhaustion, and chaos turned into the chilling and jaw-dropping art you watch today. The truth about what happened on that set is more intense than most people ever realized. Ready to know more? Then let's dive in. The D-Day.
The enemy was the Nazis, and another one called Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where yet again the enemy, was World War II. And I could.
What comes to your mind when you think about Saving Private Ryan? Nothing else but the D-Day, which happens to be the focal point of the film. Many things happened behind the scenes of that explosive war scene that the cast and crew never mentioned to their fans until now. Ready to find out? Let's explore. When audiences watched the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, most assumed they were seeing the real beaches of Normandy. The sequence was so realistic that even World War II veterans said it felt like reliving D-Day. But the truth is, that unforgettable 24-minute opening wasn't filmed in France at all. It was shot on Ballinesker Beach in County Wexford, Ireland. Steven Spielberg, the director of this iconic piece, wanted authenticity at all costs, but French authorities refused to let him film on the actual Omaha beach due to the region's preserved memorial status. So Spielberg searched for an alternative. When he saw Ballinesker Beach with its similar slope, waterline, and texture, he decided it was perfect. He then recreated the Normandy invasion down to every explosion and bullet hole, making it look so real that you could never imagine anywhere else but France. What else happened on the D-Day? Around 1,500 extras were used. Many of them were real Irish Army Reserve soldiers who trained for weeks to perform the complex movements of the landing. The logistics were enormous. Spielberg's team built exact replicas of German bunkers, artillery, and barbed wire defenses. The production spent about $12 million on that single scene alone. Spielberg recalled, "It was like shooting an entire movie inside one battle. We had explosions, pyrotechnics, hundreds of cameras rolling, and I wanted every moment to feel like documentary footage." To make the horror believable, Spielberg also hired real amputees and injured veterans to portray soldiers whose limbs were blown off during the chaos. The sight of those men lying in the surf added chilling realism to that massive massacre. Actor Tom Hanks later said in an interview, "There were moments when you forgot it was a film. You'd hear the shells go off and see guys covered in blood screaming for medics. It didn't feel like acting anymore." Cinematographer Janusz Kaminski used handheld cameras and drained some of the film's color to achieve a raw look, mimicking World War II footage. Spielberg insisted on long takes and shaky camera work to make viewers feel like they were running alongside the soldiers. Kaminski later explained, "We wanted the audience to experience what it's like to have chaos all around you. That's why the camera never stands still. It's always searching, always panicking." The realism had a powerful emotional effect, such that during early screenings, several veterans broke down or had to leave the theater. This was so bad that the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs had to set up a hotline for viewers who might be emotionally triggered. Spielberg later said, "That response told me we did something right. We honored what those men went through." Those thrilling events on the D-Day make Saving Private Ryan one of the most authentic war recreations ever filmed. The cast's brutal boot camp.
And what they've heard about the film, if they have any doubt that they might not be able to take the level of reality inside the sequences of battle.
Unlike present times when producers depend largely on CGI, stunts, and graphics manipulation for action movies, the cast of Saving Private Ryan went the extra mile to ensure an excellent portrayal of realism. This involves attaining fighting skills and being rigorously trained not just to act the role, but to become the character. Before the cameras even started rolling on Saving Private Ryan, Steven Spielberg wanted the cast to feel like real soldiers, physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and mentally bonded. To achieve that, he ordered the main actors to undergo a 10-day military-style boot camp under the harsh supervision of retired U.S. Marine Captain Dale Dye, a Vietnam veteran who had also worked on other war films like Platoon and Born on the 4th of July, but not everyone went through this boot camp. Matt Damon, who played Private James Francis Ryan, was not part of the training. But why? Damon was intentionally excused from the training because Spielberg wanted the rest of the group to resent him, just as their characters did in the film. Spielberg admitted later, "It was a psychological trick. The others went through hell together, and when Matt showed up all clean and comfortable, they naturally felt that frustration. It made their performances more real." The rest of the cast, which includes Tom Hanks, Tom Sizemore, Edward Burns, Barry Pepper, Giovanni Ribisi, Adam Goldberg, and Vin Diesel, weren't told exactly what they'd signed up for. When they arrived at the camp, they expected mild training and bonding exercises. What they got instead was relentless punishment, long marches through rain and mud, sleeping outdoors in cold conditions, digging foxholes, carrying heavy packs, and eating military portions.
Understand, we're essentially playing guys who are tired and miserable and who'd want to go home.
Edward Burns once told The Guardian, "We were soaking wet, freezing, and covered in mud. But that was the point. By the time we finished, we understood what it meant to depend on each other." Tom Hanks, who was already an Oscar-winning actor at that time, was pushed to his limits as well. He said in a 1998 interview, "I thought I was in decent shape, but after that camp I realized how little I understood about the endurance and mental toughness those soldiers had." Dale Dye, their captain, made sure no one got special treatment. He shouted orders, forced the actors to crawl under barbed wire, and sometimes woke them up in the middle of the night for surprise drills. He even used blank gunfire to simulate real combat stress. Vin Diesel said in a behind-the-scenes documentary, "He'd fire blanks over our heads while we were running uphill with full gear. You couldn't fake fear, you just reacted." By the end of the training, the men were dirty, exhausted, and closer than ever. They developed a genuine sense of brotherhood, which is the same bond that their characters would need on screen. Tom Sizemore recalled, "It wasn't acting anymore. We looked out for each other, just like soldiers do." Meanwhile, Matt Damon was comfortably absent, watching from a distance. When he finally joined the cast on set weeks later, the others were still bitter. Barry Pepper laughed years later. "We were like, oh, here comes the golden boy who skipped boot camp." That feeling never went away, and it made the scenes between us and him incredibly real. Spielberg later said the experiment worked better than he could have hoped. The boot camp didn't just prepare actors for their roles, but turned them into a believable band of brothers who understood what sacrifice meant. Improvised scene.
Yet again, the enemy, was World War II. And I couldn't do that in this case. I had too many people.
As an intense war film, there's no doubt that many of the actions will come without being well scripted, but one particular one stood out among the many. Remember the emotional and unforgettable moments in Saving Private Ryan when Private James Francis Ryan sits down with Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, and shares a heartfelt story about his brothers. He talks about them in a warm, nostalgic way, how they teased each other, how they laughed, how they were all together in that barn with a girl, and how those moments now felt like another lifetime. The scene feels so raw and natural that it's easy to believe it came straight from a veteran's memory. But here's the shocker. That entire scene was improvised by Matt Damon on the spot. According to both Steven Spielberg and Damon himself, that emotional monologue wasn't written in the original script. Damon was given only a rough idea to talk about his brothers, what they meant to him, and what he remembered about them. Spielberg told him to just speak from his heart, and boom, an iconic piece was created in split seconds. Damon later said, "Steven wanted something that didn't sound rehearsed or poetic. He told me to imagine that Ryan is finally letting out the grief and guilt he's been holding inside." The scene was so emotional that the entire crew fell silent. Even Tom Hanks, sitting beside him in the scene, later said that he was genuinely moved because he had no idea what Damon was going to say. Hanks recalled, "It wasn't acting. It felt like I was really sitting with a young soldier trying to remember what home used to feel like." Spielberg was so touched by the improvisation that he said, "It was perfect in its imperfection, exactly the kind of honesty that war brings out in people." That's the moment you see why Miller and the others were willing to risk their lives for Ryan. In later interviews, Damon revealed that the story about the barn and the girl wasn't based on any real event or personal memory, it just came to him in the moment. He said, "I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was just Ryan talking through me. It felt real, and I didn't want to overthink it." The emotional power of that improvised moment became one of the most iconic scenes in the film. The real gunfire sounds and battle noise.
Carrying out my orders, getting as many men safely to the sea.
Do you know that the deafening gunfire in Saving Private Ryan wasn't created by computers or sound libraries? You'll be beyond thrilled to know how it came about. It was captured from real World War II-era weapons. At this point, it is safe to believe that the production team actually wants to bring the real World War into this movie because what is all this accurate and realistic filming? Steven Spielberg and his sound team were determined to make every bullet, explosion, and echo in the film to sound exactly like it did on the battlefield. The goal was to make audiences feel like they were standing right there on Omaha Beach. Sound designer Gary Rydstrom, who had previously worked with Spielberg on Jurassic Park and Schindler's List, led the project. He and his team went to military ranges to record authentic weapon sounds from vintage rifles, pistols, and machine guns that soldiers actually used during World War II. They fired M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and German MG-42, capturing each weapon's mechanical clatter and distinct tone. Rydstrom said, "We wanted the weapons to have character. When you heard an MG-42, it had to sound terrifying, not just loud, but sharp and vicious, the way veterans described it." Spielberg often said, "The audience should feel the war in their bones." During the D-Day sequence, he instructed Rydstrom to layer sounds in a way that reflected a soldier's shifting perception, sometimes clear and sharp, other times muffled or distant, depending on whether the character's ears were ringing or filled with sand and water. Tom Hanks once recalled filming those chaotic moments. "The sound guys were firing blanks during takes so we could react naturally. You'd hear this relentless noise, shells whizzing, metal clanging, the ground shaking. It overwhelmed you. We didn't have to pretend to be terrified. We were the film's mix of live-on-set sound and recorded effects was so immersive that many war veterans said it triggered flashbacks." Spielberg later shared a letter from one veteran who thanked him for capturing the horror and confusion of combat with a sound so real, "I could smell the smoke again." During post-production, Rydstrom and editor Michael Kahn spent weeks layering hundreds of individual sounds. When Saving Private Ryan premiered, critics praised the sound almost as much as the visuals. The film went on to win the Academy Award for Best Sound, with Rydstrom calling it the hardest and most rewarding project of his career. The sound indeed made the movie what it is. 3,500 custom-made uniforms and realistic wardrobe details. When you watch Saving Private Ryan, one of the reasons it feels so authentic is the clothing. Every uniform, every helmet, every muddy boot looks exactly like it came straight from 1944. What most fans don't know is that almost every single uniform and accessory in the film was custom-made. The production team created over 3,500 military uniforms from scratch because real World War II uniforms were too rare and fragile to be used on set. Costume designer Joanna Johnston, who had worked with Steven Spielberg on several previous projects, was given the enormous task of making history look alive again. Joanna explained in an interview, "We couldn't just pull uniforms off the rack. We had to study every patch, button, and pocket to make sure it was authentic to the U.S. Army in 1944. She spent months researching military archives, original photos, and museum exhibits to ensure accuracy. The materials were another challenge. The wool and cotton fabrics used during the war were no longer manufactured in the same way, so the costume department worked with special textile companies to recreate the original texture and color tones. Even the aging process was carefully designed. The uniforms were dyed, dirtied, and weathered by hand to give each one a battle-worn look. Spielberg insisted that even background extras wear properly detailed gear. This meant accurate boots, belts, canteens, and even dog tags, stamped with realistic names and serial numbers. The production team also created dozens of German uniforms and equipment for the enemy soldiers, with the same level of precision. Tom Hanks once said in an interview, "It wasn't just a costume. It carried weight, literally and emotionally. You felt like you were representing real men who fought and died in those clothes." Edward Burns, who played Private Reiben, also said, "Those boots and vests were so waterlogged that we could barely run. But Spielberg told us not to complain. He said, 'That's what they felt. That's what I want you to feel.'" After production ended, most of the uniforms were cataloged and stored by Paramount Pictures, though a few were later displayed in military museums. The attention to detail in Saving Private Ryan's wardrobe became a gold standard for war films. The film color was altered.
Tell you what, sir, if you're our relief, I'm gonna file a complaint.
I wouldn't blame you. Who's your CEO?
When you watch Saving Private Ryan, one of the first things that stands out is the look of the film itself. The colors are muted, the tone is harsh, and everything seems drained of warmth. That was no accident. Steven Spielberg and cinematographer Janusz Kaminski made the deliberate choice to desaturate the film's color by nearly 60%, creating a cold, washed-out effect that mirrored the raw atmosphere of World War II. Spielberg didn't want the movie to look beautiful. He wanted it to look real. Early in production, he told Kaminski, "We're not making a movie about glory. We're showing what war really looks like. It's not pretty. It's not clean. It's gray, muddy, and lifeless." To achieve that, they developed a unique visual process. Instead of using standard film stock, they partially drained the color during post-production and even stripped the film's negative slightly to give it that bleached documentary-style appearance. Kaminski explained, "We removed the comforting saturation that most movies use. We wanted the viewer to feel like life had been sucked out of the world, just like it is for the men on that battlefield." He also used handheld cameras and natural light to create a raw, unpolished texture, as if the footage had been shot by a war correspondent right in the middle of combat. Tom Hanks said the visual tone affected how they acted. He said in an interview, "When we saw the dailies, we noticed the color was almost gone. It made everything we did feel heavier. You could see the mud, the cold, the fear. It didn't look like a movie, it looked like someone's memory." In a later interview, Spielberg reflected on that choice. "When you take away the color, you take away the comfort. You take away the distance between the audience and the soldier. That's when you start to feel what they felt." Thus, the drained color became an emotional storytelling through the lens. Vin Diesel's role.
Boot camp. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times.
Vin Diesel was one of those whom Saving Private Ryan made him a familiar face. Before then, he was just a struggling actor with only a few short films to his name. However, one of those short films, which happens to be a self-written and directed piece called Multifacial, was what changed his life forever. Fortunately, Steven Spielberg happened to see it and was so impressed by Diesel's raw emotion and presence on screen that he decided to write a role specifically for him in Saving Private Ryan. That role became Private Adrian Caparzo, one of the most memorable soldiers in the film. Diesel's story is one of pure luck meeting preparation. Multifacial, a 20-minute film about a multi-ethnic actor struggling to find work, wasn't widely known. But Spielberg caught a copy while reviewing independent films in the mid-1990s. Spielberg later said, "There was something about Vin's eyes. He had this honesty, this strength, the kind of face you could imagine on a soldier in 1944. Spielberg was so moved that he had his writing team create a new character just to include him in the film. That is what happens when it's time for one's hard work to be recognized. When Diesel got the call, he thought it was a prank. He recalled in a 1998 interview, "I didn't believe it. I was this unknown guy and Steven Spielberg wanted to give me a part in his next movie? It felt unreal. The part of Caparzo was small but emotionally heavy. He's the soldier who risks his life and ultimately dies trying to save a young French girl trapped during a sniper attack." Diesel threw everything he had into that scene. He said, "I wanted people to feel that Caparzo wasn't just a soldier. He was a man who still had compassion in the middle of hell." That small role opened every door for Vin Diesel. After Saving Private Ryan, he landed Pitch Black in 2000, The Fast and the Furious in 2001, and XXX in 2002, all of which turned him into an international star. Diesel has often said that Spielberg's belief in him changed everything. To this day, Diesel considers Saving Private Ryan one of the most meaningful experiences of his career. Almost rated NC-17. When Saving Private Ryan was first screened for the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, the film was so graphically realistic that it almost received an NC-17 rating, which would have limited its release to only adults and drastically reduced its audience. The opening 25-minute D-Day sequence filmed on Ballinesker Beach in Ireland was especially controversial. It was a raw, relentless portrayal of what happened on Omaha Beach on 6 June 1944. Bullets tore through soldiers' helmets, limbs were blown off, and the sound of men screaming for medics filled every frame. The realism was so intense that several early test viewers reportedly had to leave the theater. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Spielberg explained, "We didn't want to sanitize war. I didn't want to make another Hollywood version of D-Day where people die beautifully. I wanted people to feel what those men felt, to see what they saw." When the MPAA reviewed the film, they raised serious concerns. One MPAA representative told DreamWorks executives that Saving Private Ryan was the most graphic and disturbing depiction of war ever shown on screen. Spielberg refused to cut it down. He argued that diluting the violence would dishonor the memory of the men who actually lived and died that day. Tom Hanks, who played Captain John Miller, stood by Spielberg's decision. Hanks said in a 1999 interview, "That scene wasn't about gore, it was about chaos. It was about the sound, the confusion, the terror. You couldn't fake that, you had to show it." The debate went on for weeks. Spielberg was offered the option to tone down the color saturation or reduce certain sound effects to make the violence seem less realistic, but he refused every suggestion. Eventually, the MPAA relented and allowed the film to keep its R rating. The result was one of the most powerful war sequences ever filmed. Many veterans who saw Saving Private Ryan later said it was the closest any movie had come to capturing the true horror of combat. In the end, Spielberg's refusal to compromise made history. Tom Sizemore was almost fired. During the making of Saving Private Ryan, one of the film's most powerful performances came from Tom Sizemore, who played the tough and loyal Sergeant Mike Horvath, Captain Miller's right-hand man. But behind the scenes, Sizemore's personal struggles nearly cost him the role. At the time, he was battling serious substance addiction, and Steven Spielberg had to take extraordinary measures to keep the production from falling apart. By the mid-1990s, Sizemore was known as one of Hollywood's most talented but troubled actors. He had earned critical praise for films like Heat and Natural Born Killers, but his personal life was spiraling due to substance abuse. Spielberg, aware of Sizemore's condition, wanted him in Saving Private Ryan, but refused to take chances. Before shooting began, Spielberg reportedly told Sizemore, "You're perfect for the role, but I can't have you ruining this film." To ensure accountability, Spielberg had to make Sizemore take a substance test every single day of the shoot. If he failed even one test, Spielberg would fire him on the spot and reshoot every scene he had filmed, no matter how far along production was. Sizemore later confirmed this in interviews, saying, Steven told me, if you test dirty even once, we'll replace you, and I'll reshoot everything you've done with someone else. No questions asked. The fear of losing his biggest career opportunity helped Sizemore stay clean throughout filming. According to several crew members, Spielberg's approach was both strict and compassionate. He genuinely wanted Sizemore to succeed, but also had to protect the integrity of the film. Despite the immense pressure, Sizemore delivered one of the most authentic performances in the film. Interestingly, Spielberg's trust in Sizemore paid off. Sizemore's time on Saving Private Ryan became one of the defining chapters of his career. Neil Patrick Harris, as Private Ryan before Matt Damon, was chosen to play the all-American soldier at the heart of Saving Private Ryan. Steven Spielberg and his casting team reportedly considered several young actors for the role, and one of the most surprising names on that list was Neil Patrick Harris. At the time, Harris was best known for his teenage TV fame as Doogie Howser, MD, and Spielberg's consideration of him for such a serious, emotional role shocked many in Hollywood. In the mid-1990s, Spielberg was searching for an actor who could embody innocence, youth, and moral clarity. Someone who looked like the kind of boy any mother would want to bring home safely. Private James Francis Ryan wasn't supposed to be a hardened soldier. He was supposed to be the one worth saving. Neil Patrick Harris, then in his early 20s, fit that description physically. He had a soft, honest face and a kind of vulnerability that Spielberg found intriguing. At the time, Harris was transitioning out of his child star image and looking for roles that would prove his maturity as an actor. According to early development notes, his name circulated during the pre-production phase in 1996, before Good Will Hunting even brought Matt Damon into Spielberg's space. However, as the project evolved, Spielberg decided he wanted someone less associated with television and more of a fresh face to embody Ryan's innocence. Spielberg reportedly worried that viewers would see Harris and think, "That's Doogie in uniform," which could break the immersion. So he began looking for an unknown or up-and-coming actor. Around that same time, Damon's career began to rise after Courage Under Fire in 1996, where he lost over 40 pounds to play a gaunt Gulf War veteran. Spielberg was impressed by his dedication and authenticity. When Good Will Hunting was released in late 1997, Spielberg saw Damon's performance and immediately knew he'd found his Ryan.
You found me. I was here, and I was with the only brothers that I have left. And there's no way I was going to desert them.
Meanwhile, Harris continued to work in film and stage, but he later acknowledged that the late 1990s were a tough transition period. If Neil Patrick Harris had been chosen, the tone of Saving Private Ryan might have shifted slightly. Ryan could have felt more delicate, more visibly innocent. Matt Damon, on the other hand, brought a quiet strength and humility that perfectly balanced the hardened soldiers around him. The cast stayed in character, even off-camera. One of the lesser-known but fascinating behind-the-scenes details of Saving Private Ryan is that the actors often used only their character names on set, even when cameras weren't rolling. This was part of a deep immersion technique that began during their intense pre-filming boot camp and continued throughout the entire shoot. The goal was to make them stop acting like soldiers and start feeling like them. Remember how all the main cast except Matt Damon went through a 10 days grueling boot camp in preparation for the movie? That method didn't stop when the cameras started rolling. Tom Hanks explained in an interview, "We lived as those men. After the first few days, you stopped thinking of them as actors and started thinking of them as your squad." The men became so used to the discipline that even during downtime between takes, they'd still call each other by their film names. This immersive approach helped build genuine team spirit, but also real tension. The boot camp was deliberately miserable. No phones, no comfortable beds, no showers, and minimal food. Barry Pepper later said, "The exhaustion was real. The brotherhood was real. We knew each other by those names because, in that world, those were the only names that mattered." Tom Sizemore agreed. "When you're calling Tom Hanks captain for weeks, you start looking at him like one. He became our leader, and we followed him just like soldiers would." Even Spielberg encouraged the behavior. He avoided giving detailed emotional direction, preferring to let the actors respond naturally to their conditions. He said, "They were already living it." I didn't need to tell them how to feel tired or scared. They were tired and scared. The effect of this constant immersion showed on screen. The squad's interactions all felt unscripted because the actors had genuinely formed those relationships. Even after filming wrapped, some of the actors admitted it took time to shake off their characters. Edward Burns said he caught himself calling Barry Pepper Jackson months later. He laughed. It was weird, but we'd been through something together. It wasn't just a movie. Spielberg credited Dale Dye's training and the actors' commitment to staying in soldier mode for making Saving Private Ryan feel unlike any war film before it. The result was a level of authenticity few films have matched since. Raw action. How do you feel about the intense war scenes in Saving Private Ryan? Raw, right? That was because director Steven Spielberg insisted that nearly all of the war chaos be achieved with practical effects, not digital manipulation. During production, the visual effects team and the pyrotechnic coordinators designed the beach landings, explosions, and bullet strikes to happen in real time around the actors. The crew used small explosive charges buried in the sand or attached to nearby set pieces to simulate bullets hitting the ground, spraying dirt, and even tearing into soldiers' uniforms. Spielberg wanted the actors to react to real chaos, not green-screened action. As cinematographer Janusz Kaminski explained, "We didn't want a fake war. We wanted to make the audience feel it." The crew built trenches, bunkers, and barbed wire fields by hand, while thousands of gallons of water, mud, and fake blood were used to recreate the ghastly atmosphere of Omaha Beach. Tom Hanks once said in an interview, "Every explosion, every gunshot you see, we felt that. You could smell the smoke. You could hear the dirt raining down." The sensory overload helped the cast stay emotionally grounded. Many of them said it didn't feel like acting, but rather, it felt like surviving. Even the camera work contributed to this realism. The jittery, grainy look wasn't done with computer effects, but through careful lens and lighting choices. Interestingly, Spielberg allowed only a handful of digital tweaks in post-production. Things like removing visible safety gear, enhancing blood mist, or slightly extending explosions that didn't fully ignite on camera. But the rest was purely practical. This commitment to in-the-moment realism is what made Saving Private Ryan so visceral and unforgettable. It's rare in modern cinema to see a blockbuster rely so heavily on real explosions and human reaction, but Spielberg's old-school methods paid off. That's why more than 2 decades later, Saving Private Ryan still stands as one of the most powerful depictions of war ever put on film, because the fear you see on those actors' faces wasn't imagined. It was real. What a chilling experience the cast and crew of Saving Private Ryan faced behind the scenes. Which of these hidden facts thrilled you the most? Share with us in the comments and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this video with someone and watch other videos on this channel before you leave.